As twilight settled over the old empire, the world held its breath. The year was 410 AD. Rome, the eternal city. Once the beating heart of the Western world had begun to crumble. Its soldiers, once unshakable, no longer patrolled the edges of Britannia. They left silently, step by step, returning to defend an empire collapsing from within. And as their sandals faded into the mist, something lingered behind. Not just stone roads and crumbling villas, not only forts grown quiet and uncared for, ... They left behind a silence, a vacuum, one that would pull in new voices, new leaders, and new dreams. On the wind, whispers of change. The old order, the Roman way of life, of law, of language, had held this island for nearly 4 centuries. And now, almost overnight, it vanished. For the people of Britain, there was no grand farewell, no trumpet or proclamation, only an absence. The imperial safety net had been cut. The legions would not return. In this quiet collapse, there was fear, confusion, a sense that something immense had ended. And yet, of this darkness, something new would begin. Not right away, not cleanly, but inevitably. This is where our journey truly starts. Not in glory or conquest, but in the soft decay of a world falling asleep. From these shadows would come 1,000 years of transformation. Through war and worship, poetry and plague, the island would reshape itself. Tribes would rise, kings would fall, faiths would clash and merge. Cathedrals would climb toward the sky, where Roman columns once stood. Swords would be forged in the silence Rome left behind. So, lie back and let the quiet of the past wash over you. For this is not just the story of rulers or battles. It's the story of a land searching for its soul, a long, winding dream called medieval England. The coming of the Anglo-Saxons, as Britain stood silent in the wake of Rome's departure. Its eastern shores looked out toward the dark waters of the North Sea. Across those waves, change was coming slow, steady, and inevitable. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes did not arrive all at once. They came in scattered ships, small bands led by ambitious chieftains. They came not as an army, but as a tide migration, flowing year after year, carving their future into the bones of Roman Britain. These newcomers were not strangers to hardship. They were born of wind and storm, of forests thick with shadow and frost. And they carried with them a world all their own. Languages, heavy with alliteration. Gods who demanded courage, and customs built on loyalty and revenge. As they stepped onto British soil, they left behind a continent under strain, pressured by changing climate, conflict, and population. They were not simply invaders. They were settlers, seekers, builders. The crumbling Roman villas were alien to them, too grand, too silent. Instead, they built wooden halls on hilltops, fortified their villages, dug their roots into the earth. The native Romano-British population was forced to choose: flee to the west, to the mountains of Wales and Cornwall, resist with sword in hand, or adapt to the rising tide. And from this resistance, legends began to grow. Whispers spoke of a war leader, one who stood against the tide. A manner, perhaps a myth, who defended his people with unwavering courage. Later generations would know him as Arthur. Whether he was real or simply remembered into being, he symbolized the struggle to preserve a fading light. A stand made not for victory, but for dignity. And still, the tide came, new kingdoms were born. From this slow motion conquest, Kent, Sussex, Essex, Northumbria, ruled by warlords, turned kings, each rooted in bonds of loyalty between lord and warrior. These were not Roman governors in marble halls. These were men who ruled by their presence, by their strength in battle, and by the gold they gave to those who followed them. In smoky mead halls, warriors raised their cups to songs of glory. Fires crackled. Shadows danced on timber walls. A New England was beginning, not with a proclamation, but with firelight, oaths, and the quiet replacement of one world by another. The age of the Anglo-Saxons had begun. Pagan beliefs and heroic tales. The world of the early Anglo-Saxons was defined by bravery, loyalty, and fate. In timber halls, thick with smoke, warriors listened to the scop recite tales of old heroes like Beowulf, who faced monsters in the night. These stories were not merely entertainment. They were cultural scripture. To die in battle was honorable. To be remembered in song was eternal. Their gods reflected their reality. Woden was a wanderer and a wisdom seeker. Thunor wielded his hammer to protect mankind. Life was hard, and even the gods were not immune to fate's final blow. It was a belief system rooted in struggle, in the certainty that all things, even gods, must end. The light of Christianity returns, while the smoke of old gods still lingered in the mead halls of the Saxons. A different kind of fire was kindling in the north and west. It came not with armies or conquest, but with scrolls, with sandals worn by long pilgrimage, and with voices chanting in Latin beside windswept shores. In the remote monasteries of Ireland, Iona, and Lindisfarne, Christianity endured. Preserved by monks who had chosen a life of silence, service, and scripture, they carried a flame that had nearly gone out, and now it was returning. These monks were artists, scholars, and missionaries. They carved crosses in stone, painted gospels with interlaced beauty, and set forth to bring their light to Anglo-Saxon lands. Conversion was not sudden. It did not sweep across England in a single moment. Instead, it came as a slow, careful weaving threading itself gently into the existing beliefs, customs, and language of a people shaped by fate and fire. Kings were the first to change. Edwin of Northumbria, a warlord and skeptic, once listened to a missionary describe life as a sparrow flying briefly through a hall, passing from darkness into warmth, only to disappear again. Christianity, he was told, offered meaning to the moment inside, a light beyond the darkness, a promise that death was not the end. With baptism came transformation, but not erasure. Pagan temples became churches. Festivals merged. Old gods faded, but their names remained, quietly etched into the days of the week. In hidden valleys and along wild coastlines, monasteries grew. They were more than places of prayer. They were centers of knowledge, safe havens for memory. There, monks copied not just a Bible, but histories, science, and philosophy. They translated words into beauty on parchment lit by candlelight, surrounded by the stillness of cloistered halls. And in those halls, England began to awaken, all in sword or song. But in thought, the gospel they carried was not just about salvation. It brought law, structure, and a sense of shared purpose. Christianity stitched the scattered kingdoms of Britain together with invisible thread. Slowly, the warrior's axe made space for the abbot's quill. The old gods did not vanish overnight, but their thrones grew dusty, their names quiet, as cathedrals began to rise where once stood groves and idols. The light had returned, and though it flickered in the face of war and time, it would endure, carried on ink, in chant, and in faith. The Viking storm, the seas, had long whispered their secrets, but in the summer of 793 AD, they roared. From the gray horizon off the coast of Lindisfarne, ships appeared sleek, curved, and silent as shadows. Their prows carved like dragons, their sails full of northern wind. The monks of the Holy Island never saw them coming, and by the time they did, it was too late. The Norsemen landed without mercy. What followed was not battle, it was ruin. The sacred altars were overturned, gospels trampled, gold chalices taken. The sea ran red with martyrs' blood. It was not just a raid, it was the end of an era. Word of the attack spread like fire through wet grass. The Vikings had come and they would come again. Each summer, they returned, their ships slipping through rivers and fjords like wolves through forest. They struck monasteries, coastal villages, inland towns. They knew exactly where to land. They were master sailors, skilled craftsmen, brutal warriors, and opportunists. The Norse did not fear Christian wrath. They feared no god but their own. Odin, who hung from the world tree, Thor, who rode the thunder. They fought for honor, wealth, and the glory of being remembered. At first, they came to take, but soon they came to stay. They wintered in camps. Then they claimed towns. The Danjala was born a portion of England under Norse rule, where Viking law, language, and gods coexisted with the old Saxon ways. Some Anglo-Saxons fled, others fought Ka. Many bent and blended, adopting Norse customs, marrying Norse families, learning Norse words. Kingdoms fell. The maps changed. And the rhythm of England itself shifted beneath the weight of northern boots. The storm, it seemed, could not be stopped. But in the southern kingdom of Wessex, one man refused to be swept away. He did not march with rage. He waited, planned, endured. His name was Alfred, and he would answer the Viking storm not with fire, but with vision. But that is a story for the next watch of the night. Alfred, the great rebuilder of a nation. The storm had come. Towns had burned. Monasteries lay in ruins. The old songs were quieted by Viking axes. But deep in the marshes of Somerset, beneath a gray winter sky, hope kindled quietly. There, in the stillness of defeat, a fugitive king began to dream of resurrection. His name was Alfred, not yet great, not yet triumphant, but resolute. He did not rage, he listened. He watched the land, broken and bleeding, and knew that survival meant more than battle. In the spring of 878, he returned from exile, with farmers and freedmen, monks, and warriors. He raised a force not vast, but willing. At Edington, the Viking tide met a wall of English steel. And when the shield walls clashed, it was not just land that was at stake. It was the soul of England. When the battle was done, the Vikings fled, and their leader, Guthrum, was baptized in the waters of peace. But Alfred did not rest. He knew England needed more than victory. It needed rebuilding from root to crown. He reimagined the kingdom. No longer could men leave their fields for fleeting war. So he built the burghs, fortified towns that guarded the land year-round, Within their walls, markets, homes, workshops, seeds of modern cities. He divided his army so some could defend while others tended crops. He created a navy to defend the coast. He restructured law and order, but Alfred's vision reached further, into parchment and ink. He saw that a kingdom could not endure without memory. So he called for books to be written not in Latin, but in English, the language of the people. He translated works himself. He believed that wisdom belonged not just to priests or nobles, but to all who would seek it. Under his guidance, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle began, a living record of his people's story. Year by year, breath by breath, it was not just history. It was identity. Alfred codified the law not with cruelty, but with compassion. He blended the customs of many tribes into a single English code, grounded in fairness, guided by faith. He did not crown himself an emperor. He called himself King of the Anglo-Saxons, a servant of his people, a shepherd in the storm. And so, as the smoke cleared from Viking raids, and as England stitched itself together with ink, stone, and spirit, Alfred the Great stood as something rare in any age. A warrior who built, a thinker who ruled, a father to a nation not yet born, but already dreaming. The age of unification. The storm had passed, not entirely, but enough for the land to breathe again. In the soft dawn after war, a new dream began to take shape. A dream of unity, of order, of peace. Alfred was gone, but his vision lived on. Son Edward the Elder, his daughter Ethelfladza, Lady of the Mercians, and their heirs. They picked up the threads Alfred had spun, and with patience and strength began to weave a nation, burr by burr, law by law, town by town. The kingdoms of England, once divided Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia, began to merge. No longer rivals, but limbs of the same body. Roads were repaired, coins minted with a single king's face. Monasteries flourished again. Their bells rang not in fear, but in prayer. Fields stretched green under peaceful skies. Trade routes flowed once more, bringing wool and wine, salt and song from one coast to another. And through it all, memory remained. Memory of the past, of what had been lost. The Danes still ruled parts of the east, the Danola. And yet, even here, the tide was shifting. Danish settlers married into Saxon families. Customs blended, names mingled. The scars of invasion became threads of connection. But across the sea, new eyes watched England's prosperity with envy. The kings of Denmark, bold ambitious, saw a land rich with harvest and gold. Under King Canute, England was conquered, again not in fire, but in strategy. Canute was not a pillager, but a statesman. He ruled with wisdom and piety, respecting English laws, protecting the church, and marrying the widow of an English king. For a time, England was part of a North Sea empire, stretching from Norway to Denmark. And yet, the identity that Alfred had helped forge did not disappear. Even under a foreign crown. The soul of England held fast. When the Danish line faded, the throne passed back to the Saxons. Edward the Confessor ruled with quiet dignity, pious, thoughtful, and fair. His court glimmered with peace, but behind its walls, the air trembled with ambition. Powerful nobles eyed the throne. Across the Channel, Normandy stirred. The age of unification had brought stability, but change was once again on the wind. For though England had become one kingdom, its crown would not rest for long, and soon, on the fields of Hastings, the fate of all that had been built would be decided. The Norman Conquest, a turning point in English history. Imagine standing on the misty shores of 11th century England. The air is thick with tension and uncertainty. Across the Channel, a formidable duke named William of Normandy is preparing to claim a throne not his by birthright, but by resolve and conquest. The year is 1066, a year that will forever alter the course of English history. The old Anglo-Saxon order teeters on the brink of collapse as three claimants vie for the crown. The clash that follows will not just be a battle of armies, but a battle of cultures, laws, and languages. Walk with the Norman knights as their ships cut through the cold waters. Hear the thunder of hooves at the Battle of Hastings. Feel the shift beneath your feet as England transforms into a land shaped by Norman rule. Castles rise, the feudal system takes root, and the English language begins its evolution, ready to journey back to this epic moment and uncover the forces that reshaped a nation. Unity and growth, the golden age of the Anglo-Saxons. Step into a time when peace settled like morning dew across the land. Trade routes buzzed with merchants, their silver coins glinting as they passed from hand to hand, carrying English names. Far beyond the shore, towns flourished under the wide sky, their bustling markets alive with the promise of prosperity. Within the stone walls of monasteries, voices rose in hymn and prayer, blending faith with governance in a delicate balance. Here, knowledge thrived as scribes copied ancient texts by flickering candlelight, safeguarding the wisdom of generations. This was an era of growth, not just of wealth, but of identity. A people finding their rhythm, their culture blooming like the fields they tended. England was no longer a patchwork of warbands, and King's It was becoming a nation. The Norman tide, Hastings, and the end of Anglo-Saxon England. On a mist-shrouded hill near Hastings, two worlds collided with the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel. The shield wall, steadfast and tested by decades, met the swift charge of Norman cavalry, a eruption of fury that would echo through the centuries. Harold, the last Anglo-Saxon king, stood firm, his gaze heavy with the weight of a kingdom. Opposite him, William of Normandy, the Duke turned conqueror, pressed forward with calculated resolve. This was no mere battle. It was the final act of an era. When dusk fell, the earth drank deep of sacrifice. The Anglo-Saxon age faded into shadow, giving way to a new dawn shaped by Norman law, language, and lineage. The tide had turned, forever changing the story of England. Norman rule and transformation, castles, feudalism, and cultural fusion. Stone castles rose like silent sentinels across the English landscape, their towering walls casting long shadows over fields once familiar. The Normans brought with them a new order, a world ruled by feudal bonds, where loyalty was pledged through land and law. French words mingled with the Old English tongue, weaving a new language of power and poetry. The courts buzzed with the drafting of laws and the reshaping of customs. As a culture, both foreign and familiar, took root beneath the stern gaze of Norman lords, England's soul began to adapt, not vanish. This was not just conquest, but transformation, a fusion of old and new, the birth of a kingdom reborn from stone, blood, and word. The legacy of Henry II, law, governance, and conflict with the church in the shadowed halls of power. A new force took shape not on the battlefield, but in the quiet rustle of parchment and the measured words of judges. Henry II, a king, both fierce and calculating, wove a legacy that stretched beyond swords. Courts filled with voices as the crown's law spread across the land, binding lords and peasants alike. Yet, power was never without challenge. The throne clashed with the crozier in a struggle for supremacy, king against church, crown against creed. It was a reign of iron will and shifting balances, where the sword met the robe and the future of England's governance was forged in the fire of conflict and compromise. Crusades and absentee kings, Richard, the Lionheart, and the price of glory. The king who sang in the courts of France and dreamed of distant Jerusalem left his kingdom behind, crossing seas and deserts on a quest both holy and perilous, chart. The Lionheart, a warrior wrapped in legend, wore his crown like a mantle of flame, but his absence echoed back home in England, ruled by stewards, stretched thin and tested. The kingdom bent under the weight of war and ransom. Yet it did not break. This was a time of glory and sacrifice, where faith, ambition, and loyalty entwined in a dance as old as kingship itself. Magna Carta and rebellion, John, discontent, and the first push for rights by the winding banks of the Thames at Runnymede. A parchment stretched beneath quills and seals, a silent revolution inked in royal blood and baronial defiance. King John, whose reign was shadowed by war, loss, and rebellion, bowed not just to nobles, but to an idea older than crowns, that even kings must answer to the law. This was no simple surrender, but the first tremor of a new order, where power was checked and rights began to take root. The Magna Carta was both shield and promise, a fragile pact forged in tension, yet destined to echo through centuries. Here, England glimpsed the birth of justice beyond the throne. The foundations of a nation, legacy, continuity, and the road to Parliament. From the sturdy Saxon halls to the towering Norman stone. From whispered prayers in cloisters to royal proclamations in great halls. England was no longer just a land, it was a living tapestry, a patchwork woven from many threads, languages, laws, faiths, and dreams. Here, the seeds of governance took root, slowly growing into the Parliament, a place where voices could be heard beyond the crown's decree. The story was one of continuity and change, of a people shaped by history's storms, yet reaching for a future forged in unity. As twilight descends on this chapter, the road ahead beckons one of hope, challenge, and the making of a nation.